The dust kicked up around Louisa Oliver's worn boots as her father's hand connected with her cheek one final time, sending her stumbling backward into the unforgiving Arizona sun. She clutched the fabric of her simple cotton dress, the only possession she had left in this world, as Malcolm Oliver pointed a shaking finger toward the horizon beyond their ranch. "You are no daughter of mine," he spat, his face purple with rage. "You will not shame this family with your refusal. Charles Whitmore is a respectable man, and you threw his proposal back in his face like it meant nothing." Louisa touched her burning cheek, tasting blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. "He is 43 years old, father. I am 19. He has buried 2 wives already, and everyone knows how they died. I will not be the third." "Lies and gossip from jealous women," her father snarled. "Charles Whitmore owns half the territory between here and Tucson. He could have given you everything, given this family the connections we need. But you are too proud, too foolish, too much like your mother." "Do not speak of her," Louisa whispered, but her voice carried no strength anymore. Malcolm Oliver turned his back on her, his shoulders rigid beneath his Sunday coat despite the heat of the July afternoon in 1883. "You have 1 hour to be off my land. Take nothing but what you wear. If I see you again, I will have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing. You are dead to me, girl." The door of the ranch house slammed shut, and Louisa stood alone in the yard where she had played as a child, where her mother had taught her to ride, where she had believed she had a home. The chickens pecked at the dirt near her feet, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just collapsed around her. She looked down at herself. The pale blue dress was clean but faded, mended in several places. Her boots were scuffed but sturdy. She had no hat, no gloves, no money, no food, no water. The sun beat down mercilessly, and she knew that standing here would solve nothing. Her father was not a man who changed his mind. Louisa began walking toward the road that led to Douglas, Arizona, 3 miles distant. She had been to town countless times, but never on foot, never alone, never with nowhere to go. The heat shimmered off the dirt road, and sweat began to soak through her dress within minutes. She tried not to think about what would happen when night fell, or where she would sleep, or how she would eat. The town of Douglas lay near the border with Mexico, a growing settlement that had sprung up around the copper mines and cattle ranches. It was rough and loud and full of men who looked at young women like her with hungry eyes. Her father had always kept her close, protected, isolated. Now she understood it had been less about protection and more about control, about keeping her pristine for whatever business arrangement he could negotiate. The road stretched endlessly before her, wavering in the heat. Her throat was already dry, and she had barely covered half a mile. A lizard darted across her path and disappeared into the scrub brush. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing and the faint sound of men shouting. A ranch, but not her father's ranch anymore, not her home. She had no idea what she would do when she reached Douglas. She had no skills that anyone would pay for, no friends who could take her in without risking her father's wrath. Malcolm Oliver was a powerful man in this territory, and everyone knew his temper. Anyone who helped his disowned daughter would make an enemy, and few could afford that. Louisa stumbled on a rock and caught herself, her hands scraping against the rough dirt. She stood up slowly, brushing off her palms, and forced herself to keep walking. The sun climbed higher, and she could feel her skin beginning to burn. Her lips were cracking, and every breath seemed to pull more moisture from her body. A wagon appeared on the road behind her, and she moved to the side to let it pass. The driver, an older man she recognized from church, looked at her with curiosity but did not stop. He would have heard by now. News traveled fast in this territory. Malcolm Oliver's daughter, cast out like a criminal, walking alone in the heat. They would all know soon enough. By the time she could see the buildings of Douglas in the distance, Louisa's vision was beginning to blur. Her steps were unsteady, and she had to stop every few minutes to rest. The sun was past its peak now, but the heat had not diminished. She wondered if she would make it to town before she collapsed. She did not see the rider until he was almost upon her. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn, and she found herself looking up at a tall man on a paint horse. He wore a battered hat pulled low over his eyes, and his sun-darkened skin spoke of years spent outdoors. He could not have been more than 25, with a strong jaw and broad shoulders. His shirt was dusty from travel, and a bedroll was tied behind his saddle. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and carried a hint of concern. "You look like you could use some help." Louisa wanted to refuse, to tell him she was fine, but her pride had already cost her everything. "I am walking to Douglas," she managed to say, though her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The cowboy swung down from his horse in one fluid motion and pulled a canteen from his saddle. "Here," he said, offering it to her. "Drink slowly." The water was warm but tasted like salvation. Louisa had to force herself to take small sips when every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. The cowboy watched her carefully, his eyes assessing but not unkind. "Name is Harrison Kane," he said. "I am heading into Douglas myself. You are welcome to ride if you like. That sun will kill you before you make it another mile on foot." "I cannot pay you," Louisa said quietly. Harrison Kane's expression darkened slightly. "Did not ask you to." A man who would leave a woman to die of thirst in the desert is not much of a man at all. He helped her up onto his horse before swinging up behind her. Louisa had never been so close to a man who was not family, and she sat rigid in the saddle, acutely aware of his presence at her back. But Harrison Kane kept a respectful distance, his hands steady on the reins, guiding the horse toward town with practiced ease. "You got people in Douglas?" he asked after a few minutes of silence. "No," Louisa admitted. "There was no point in lying. Place to stay?" "No." Harrison was quiet for a moment, and Louisa could feel him thinking. "There is a boarding house run by a woman named Martha Henley. She is fair and honest, and she might have work if you need it. I can take you there." "Why are you helping me?" Louisa asked, the words coming out before she could stop them. "You do not know me. You do not know what I might have done. I know you are walking alone in the heat with nothing but the clothes on your back," Harrison said simply. "I know you are hurt and scared and trying not to show it. That is enough." Those words broke something inside Louisa, and she felt tears begin to slide down her cheeks. She tried to stop them, but they kept coming, silent and hot. Harrison said nothing, just kept the horse moving at a steady walk, giving her the dignity of her grief. By the time they reached the edge of Douglas, Louisa had composed herself again. The town was busy with afternoon activity. Men loaded wagons outside the general store, women walked with baskets over their arms, and the sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons. It was a rough town, but it was alive in a way her father's isolated ranch had never been. Harrison guided the horse down the main street, past the bank and the post office, until they reached a 2-story wooden building with a sign that read Henley's Boarding House. He dismounted first and then helped Louisa down, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared inside. Louisa stood in the shade of the porch, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dress was dusty and sweat-stained, her hair had fallen loose from its braid, and her face was sunburned. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman with nowhere else to go. Harrison emerged a few minutes later with a stout woman in her 50s. Martha Henley had kind eyes but a no-nonsense expression. She looked Louisa up and down and then nodded once. "Harrison says you need a room and work," Martha said. "I can offer both, but I expect honesty and hard work in return. I run a clean establishment and I will not have any trouble here." "I can work," Louisa said, lifting her chin. "I can cook and clean and mend. I can keep accounts and read and write. I will earn my keep." Martha's expression softened slightly. "You are educated then. That is good. I have been needing help with the books." "The room is small, but it is clean and private. Meals are included. You will help with the cooking and cleaning, and you will manage the accounts. In return, you get your room and board and $3 a week for personal expenses. Fair." $3 a week was not much, but it was more than Louisa had right now. "Fair," she agreed. "Then come inside and I will show you your room," Martha said. She glanced at Harrison. "You staying, Kane? Got a room reserved," Harrison said. "I will be here a few days while I sort out some business with the cattle buyers." Martha nodded and led Louisa inside. The boarding house was simple but well maintained. The floors were clean, the windows let in good light, and the smell of bread baking came from the kitchen. Martha showed her up a narrow staircase to a small room at the back of the second floor. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a single window that looked out over the yard. "It is not much," Martha said, "but it is yours. Dinner is at 6. You can start work tomorrow morning. For now, get yourself cleaned up and rest. You look like you have been through hell." After Martha left, Louisa sat down on the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had been disowned, cast out by the only family she had left. She had no money, no possessions, no future that she could see clearly. But she was alive, and she had a roof over her head, and a stranger had shown her kindness when he had no reason to. She thought about Harrison Kane, about the way he had offered water without asking questions, about how he had brought her here and vouched for her to Martha Henley. He had said, "That is enough," when she asked why he was helping her, as if basic human decency was reason enough. In Louisa's experience, most men expected something in return for their kindness, but Harrison had asked for nothing. That evening, Louisa washed her face and hands in the basin and did her best to make herself presentable. Her dress was wrinkled and stained, but it was all she had. She braided her dark hair and pinned it up, then made her way downstairs to the dining room. Several boarders were already seated at the long table. Martha introduced them: a mining engineer named Thomas, a schoolteacher named Miss Peterson, an elderly couple named the Williamses, and Harrison Kane. Everyone nodded politely, though Louisa could see the curiosity in their eyes. The food was simple but good: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Louisa had not realized how hungry she was until she started eating. She tried to pace herself, to eat slowly and politely, but her body demanded fuel. "You settling in all right?" Harrison asked quietly. He sat across from her, his hat hung on the back of his chair. "Yes, thank you," Louisa said. "And thank you for bringing me here. I do not know what would have happened if you had not stopped." Harrison shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Louisa said, meeting his eyes. "They would not have. I passed several people on the road. You were the only one who stopped." The conversation moved on to other topics: the state of the mines, the railroad expansion, rumors of trouble with rustlers in the territory. Louisa listened more than she spoke, learning the rhythms of this new life she had been thrust into. After dinner, she helped Martha clear the table and wash the dishes. The older woman worked with efficient movements, and Louisa tried to match her pace. "You have done kitchen work before," Martha observed. "I grew up on a ranch," Louisa said carefully. "I learned to cook and keep house." Martha was quiet for a moment, scrubbing a pot. "It is not my business what brought you here," she said finally. "But I will say this. Douglas is a place where people can start over if they are willing to work for it. You seem like a hard worker, and that is all I need to know." That night, Louisa lay in her narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the town. Voices from the street, a dog barking, the distant sound of music from a saloon. She thought about her father, about the ranch that had been her home, about her mother who had died 3 years ago and left her alone with a man who saw her only as property to be traded. She thought about Charles Whitmore, who had smiled at her with cold eyes and told her father she would be broken in properly. She thought about the rumors that followed him, whispers of bruises hidden under long sleeves, of screams in the night, of 2 wives who had died too young under suspicious circumstances. Her father had heard the same rumors and had not cared. And she thought about Harrison Kane, who had stopped for a stranger in the desert and asked for nothing in return. The next morning, Louisa woke early and dressed in the same blue dress, now cleaned as best she could manage. She found Martha already in the kitchen, starting breakfast. "You are up early," Martha said approvingly. "Good. We have a full house this week, so there is plenty to do." Louisa spent the morning learning Martha's routines, how she liked the table set when each meal was served, how the accounts were kept. The work was hard but not unfamiliar, and Louisa threw herself into it with determination. This was her chance to prove herself, to build something of her own. Harrison appeared for breakfast along with the other boarders. He looked freshly shaved and wore a clean shirt, though his boots still carried the dust of the trail. He nodded to Louisa as he sat down but did not speak to her directly. She appreciated that he was not making a spectacle of their acquaintance. After breakfast, Harrison left for his meetings with the cattle buyers, and Louisa spent the rest of the morning scrubbing floors and beating rugs. By noon, she was exhausted but satisfied. Martha seemed pleased with her work. "You have a good hand with cleaning," Martha said. "This afternoon, I want you to look over the account books. They have gotten away from me these past few months, and I need someone with a clear head to sort them out." Louisa spent the afternoon in Martha's small office, poring over columns of numbers and receipts. She found several errors and inconsistencies, which she carefully corrected. The work was absorbing, and she lost track of time until Martha knocked on the door to tell her it was time to help with dinner. That evening, as Louisa served the meal, she noticed Harrison watching her with a thoughtful expression. When she met his eyes, he looked away quickly, focusing on his plate. She wondered what he was thinking, what he saw when he looked at her. After dinner, as the boarders dispersed to their rooms or the parlor, Harrison approached her as she cleared the table. "Miss Oliver," he said quietly, "I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment. Outside, perhaps. It is a pleasant evening." Louisa glanced at Martha, who nodded permission. She followed Harrison out to the front porch, where the evening air was finally beginning to cool. The sky was turning purple and gold with the sunset, and the street was quieter now. "I wanted to check that you are doing all right," Harrison said, leaning against the porch railing. "Martha can be demanding, and I know this is all new to you." "I am managing," Louisa said. "Martha is fair and the work is honest. I am grateful to be here." Harrison nodded, seeming satisfied. "I also wanted to apologize if I overstepped yesterday. I should have asked before assuming you needed help." "You saved my life," Louisa said simply. "I am not sure what there is to apologize for." Harrison was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street. "I heard some talk in town today," he said carefully, "about Malcolm Oliver's daughter. About how she refused to marry Charles Whitmore and got herself thrown out. People are saying you were ungrateful, that you did not know your place." Louisa felt her face flush with anger and shame. "I see." "I do not believe gossip," Harrison continued, turning to face her. But I wanted you to know what is being said so you are prepared. This is a small town and people talk." "What do you believe?" Louisa asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Harrison met her eyes directly. "I believe that Charles Whitmore is a snake and everyone knows it. I believe that any father who would throw his daughter out for refusing to marry such a man is no father at all. And I believe that you are braver than most people give you credit for." Louisa felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening heat. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Harrison said. "I know you would rather face an uncertain future than marry a man you fear. That takes courage, or foolishness," Louisa said bitterly. "Same thing sometimes," Harrison replied with a slight smile. "The world needs more fools like you." Despite everything, Louisa found herself smiling back. It felt strange, like she had forgotten how. "What brings you to Douglas, Mr. Kane?" "Harrison," he corrected. "And cattle. I work for a ranch up near Flagstaff, and I am here to negotiate sales with the buyers. It is boring work mostly, but it pays well." "You are a foreman then, of sorts." "I manage the stock and handle the sales. The owner trusts me to get fair prices." He paused. "I will be here another few days, maybe a week. After that, I head back north." Louisa felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. She barely knew this man, but he had been kind to her when no one else had. The thought of him leaving felt like losing the one friend she had in this strange new life. "Well," she said, keeping her voice light, "I hope your business goes well." "Thank you," Harrison said. He straightened up from the railing. "I should let you get back to your work, but if you need anything while I am here, you need only ask." Over the next few days, Louisa settled into the rhythm of life at the boarding house. She woke before dawn to help Martha with breakfast, spent the mornings cleaning and the afternoons managing the accounts, and helped serve dinner in the evenings. The work was exhausting, but it gave her purpose and kept her mind from dwelling on darker thoughts. Harrison was often out during the day, but he was always present for meals. Louisa found herself looking forward to those times, to the quiet conversations they had when he would linger after the other boarders had left. He told her about the ranch where he worked, about the endless sky of northern Arizona, about the hard but honest life of a cowboy. She told him about her mother, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about the books she had read and the dreams she had once had. "What did you want to be?" Harrison asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Before all this happened, Louisa considered the question. "I wanted to travel," she said finally. "I wanted to see places beyond the ranch, beyond Arizona. I wanted to choose my own life instead of having it chosen for me." "Still can," Harrison said. "With what money?" Louisa asked, but there was no bitterness in her voice now, just practicality. "You are earning money now, not much, but it is a start, and you are smart and capable. The world is changing, Miss Oliver. Women are doing things now that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago." "Call me Louisa," she said softly. "And I appreciate your optimism, but the reality is that I am lucky to have this position. Most women in my situation end up in far worse circumstances." Harrison's jaw tightened. "I know. That is what makes me angriest about men like your father and Charles Whitmore. They back women into corners and then act surprised when those women fight back." "You are different," Louisa observed. "Most men do not think the way you do." Harrison shrugged. "My mother raised me and my two sisters after my father died. I watched her fight every day to keep us fed and clothed and educated. I watched men try to take advantage of her because she was a widow, and I watched her stand her ground time and again. She taught me that strength has nothing to do with how much you can lift or how fast you can draw a gun. It has everything to do with how you treat people who have less power than you." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Louisa said. She was, Harrison said quietly. She died 5 years ago, pneumonia, but I think about her every day, about what she would think of the man I have become. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. Louisa felt something growing between them, something warm and fragile and precious. She was afraid to name it, afraid that doing so would break the spell. But on the 6th day of Harrison's stay in Douglas, everything changed. Louisa was in the kitchen helping Martha prepare lunch when the front door crashed open. She heard heavy footsteps and raised voices, and then Martha was rushing toward the commotion with Louisa close behind. Malcolm Oliver stood in the entrance hall, his face red with rage. 2 men flanked him, Charles Whitmore and the town sheriff, a man named Patterson who owed her father several favors. "There you are," Malcolm Oliver said, pointing at Louisa, "living in sin in this house of ill repute." "This is a respectable boarding house," Martha said sharply, stepping between Malcolm and Louisa. "And you are not welcome here, Oliver. Get out." "That is my daughter," Malcolm said. "She is coming with me." "I am 19 years old," Louisa said, her voice shaking but clear. "I am of legal age." "You disowned me. You have no claim on me anymore." "You are my daughter, and you will do as I say," Malcolm roared. "You will marry Charles, or I will see you ruined completely." Charles Whitmore stepped forward, his thin lips curving into a smile that made Louisa's skin crawl. "Now, Louisa, do not be difficult. Your father and I have come to an agreement. The wedding will be next week. You will come home, apologize for your behavior, and we will forget this unfortunate incident ever happened." "No," Louisa said. "I will not marry you." "You will," Charles said, his smile fading. "One way or another." She said no. Harrison's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He had appeared from the back of the house, and now he moved to stand beside Louisa. "The lady has made her position clear." "This is none of your concern, Cowboy," Malcolm Oliver spat. "I am making it my concern," Harrison said calmly. "Miss Oliver is under the protection of this boarding house. She has employment and lodging. She does not need or want anything from you." "Who the hell are you?" Charles demanded. "Harrison Kane," Harrison said. "And you are Charles Whitmore. I have heard a lot about you. None of it good." Charles's face went pale with rage. "How dare you?" "I dare because someone needs to," Harrison interrupted. "Everyone in this territory knows what you are, Whitmore. Everyone knows what happened to your first 2 wives. You are not getting a third." "Sheriff," Malcolm Oliver said sharply, "arrest this man for slander." Sheriff Patterson looked uncomfortable. "Now, Kane, you should not go making accusations you cannot prove." "Cannot prove or will not investigate?" Harrison asked pointedly. "How much does Oliver pay you, Sheriff?" "Enough to ignore murder." The room went silent. Louisa stared at Harrison, shocked by his boldness. Martha looked torn between admiration and fear. Malcolm Oliver and Charles Whitmore both looked like they wanted to kill him. "You have crossed a line," Charles said softly, his voice deadly. "I will see you ruined for this." "Try it," Harrison said. "But first, you are going to leave this boarding house, and you are going to leave Miss Oliver alone. She has made her choice, and the law says she has that right." "The law says what I tell it to say," Malcolm Oliver said. "Not everywhere," Harrison replied. "And not forever." "Things are changing, Oliver. Men like you are dinosaurs, and you are too stupid to realize you are already extinct." Malcolm Oliver lunged forward, but Harrison was faster. In one smooth motion, he had drawn his revolver and aimed it steadily at Malcolm's chest. The room froze. "I do not want to shoot you," Harrison said calmly, "but I will if you force my hand. Now leave." "You will regret this," Charles Whitmore hissed. "Both of you." "Maybe," Harrison said, "but not as much as I would regret standing by and doing nothing. Now get out." Sheriff Patterson, seeing that the situation was about to spiral out of control, took charge. "Everyone calm down," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Oliver, Whitmore, let us go. We can sort this out at my office." "There is nothing to sort out," Harrison said, not lowering his gun. "Miss Oliver is an adult. She has the right to choose her own path. If you come here again, I will consider it harassment, and I will respond accordingly." Malcolm Oliver stared at his daughter with cold hatred. "You are dead to me," he said. "When you are starving in the gutter, do not come crawling back." "I would rather starve," Louisa said quietly, "than live one more day under your roof." The three men left, though Charles Whitmore paused at the door to look back at Louisa. "This is not over," he said. When they were gone, Harrison lowered his gun and holstered it. His hands were steady, but Louisa could see the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. Martha let out a breath she had been holding. "Lord above, Kane, you just made yourself some powerful enemies." "They were already enemies," Harrison said. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." Louisa felt tears burning in her eyes. "You should not have done that. They will make trouble for you now." Harrison turned to look at her, and his expression was fierce. "Let them try. I meant what I said, Louisa." "That is enough. You said no, and that should be the end of it. The fact that it is not, the fact that men like your father and Whitmore think they can force you into something you do not want, makes me sick." "But your reputation, your job, will be fine," Harrison said firmly. "I work for a good man, and he does not do business with men like Oliver or Whitmore. And even if I lose my position, I would rather live with integrity than live as a coward." Martha nodded slowly. "Well, I suppose that settles it then. Louisa stays here, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. And you, Harrison Kane, just moved up significantly in my estimation." That night, Louisa could not sleep. She kept replaying the confrontation, kept seeing the look in her father's eyes, kept hearing Charles Whitmore's threat. But most of all, she kept thinking about Harrison, about the way he had stood between her and danger without hesitation. She had known him less than a week, but already he had changed her life twice. First by saving her in the desert, and now by defending her when no one else would. He had risked his safety, his reputation, his future, for a woman he barely knew. The question was why. The next morning at breakfast, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone had heard about the confrontation, and the other boarders looked at Louisa with a mixture of sympathy and concern. Miss Peterson, the schoolteacher, sat next to her and squeezed her hand under the table. "You are very brave," Miss Peterson whispered. "I hope you know that." Harrison was quieter than usual, his expression thoughtful. After breakfast, he asked Louisa to walk with him. They headed toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open desert and the mountains rose in the distance. "I have been thinking," Harrison said as they walked, "about what happens next." "What do you mean?" Louisa asked. "I mean that your father and Whitmore are not going to let this go. They will try something else, some other way to force your hand or make your life unbearable, and I will be leaving in a few days to return to Flagstaff." Louisa's heart sank. She had known he would leave eventually, but hearing him say it made it real. "I understand. You have your own life. I cannot expect you to stay here and protect me forever." Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. "That is not what I am saying. What I am saying is that I do not want to leave you here unprotected, so I have a proposal." "A proposal?" Louisa's voice came out higher than she intended. "Not that kind," Harrison said quickly, though his face flushed slightly. "At least not exactly. What I am proposing is that you come with me to Flagstaff. The ranch where I work is always looking for help, and they would pay you better than Martha can. You would be safer there, away from your father and Whitmore. You would have a fresh start." Louisa stared at him, her mind racing. You want me to travel with you, alone. Harrison, that would ruin whatever is left of my reputation. We could marry, Harrison said, the words coming out in a rush. Not for real, I mean, not right away. But we could marry for appearance's sake to protect your reputation. And then, if you wanted, if we found that we suited each other, it could become a real marriage. And if not, we could part as friends and you would still have the job and the fresh start. Louisa felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. You are proposing a marriage of convenience. I am proposing a solution, Harrison said. Look, I know this is sudden. I know we barely know each other. But Louisa, I have seen enough of the world to know that sometimes you have to act fast, trust your instincts. My instinct tells me that you are a good person who deserves better than what life has given you so far. My instinct tells me that I want to help you, and that maybe, if we give it time, there could be something more between us. And if there is not, Louisa asked, if we find we do not suit, then we part ways and no harm done, Harrison said. I would never trap you into something you did not want. You would be free to leave whenever you chose. Louisa looked out at the desert, at the endless expanse of sand and rock and sky. She thought about staying in Douglas, about constantly looking over her shoulder, about the inevitable day when her father or Charles Whitmore would try again. She thought about the limited future she had here, the narrow path her life would take. And she thought about Harrison, about the kindness he had shown her, about the way her heart sped up when he smiled, about the possibility of something more. All right, she said quietly, I will marry you. Harrison's face broke into a wide smile. You will. I will, Louisa said, and found herself smiling back. When do we leave? I need 2 more days to finish my business here. We can be married tomorrow by the justice of the peace, and then leave the day after. They were married the next afternoon in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. Martha stood as witness, along with Miss Peterson. Louisa wore her blue dress, freshly washed and mended. Harrison wore his best shirt and had gotten a haircut that morning. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. When the justice of the peace pronounced them man and wife, Harrison leaned down and kissed her gently on the forehead. Thank you, he whispered, for trusting me. That night, Harrison slept on the floor of Louisa's room, insisting that she take the bed. We will have plenty of time to sort out the details, he said. For now, let us just get through this next part. The next day they prepared to leave. Martha was sorry to see Louisa go but understood the necessity. You write to me, she ordered, embracing Louisa tightly. Let me know you are safe and happy. I will, Louisa promised. They left Douglas in the early morning before the town was fully awake. Harrison had purchased a horse for Louisa, a gentle mare named Daisy, and they rode north with their supplies packed carefully in saddlebags. The journey to Flagstaff would take over a week, traveling through some of the most beautiful and unforgiving landscape in the territory. As Douglas disappeared behind them, Louisa felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, traveling into the unknown with a man who was now her husband, but still essentially a stranger. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Harrison set a steady pace, stopping frequently to rest the horses and let Louisa adjust to long hours in the saddle. He was patient and considerate, teaching her how to care for her horse, how to set up camp, how to read the land around them. You are a good teacher, Louisa said on the 3rd night as they sat by their campfire under a canopy of stars. You are a good student, Harrison replied. You learn fast and you do not complain. I spent 19 years complaining about my father's rules, Louisa said. I am done with complaining. Now I just want to live. Harrison poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the night. Can I ask you something personal? We are married, Louisa said with a slight smile. I think personal questions are allowed. What did your father do that was so terrible? I mean, besides try to force you to marry Whitmore. There is something else, something that made you so determined to refuse. Louisa was quiet for a long moment. My mother died 3 years ago, she said finally. Officially, it was pneumonia. But the truth is, my father killed her. Harrison's head snapped up. What? Not with his hands, Louisa clarified, but with his neglect and his cruelty. She got sick, and he refused to send for the doctor because he said it was too expensive. He made her continue working, continue taking care of the house and the ranch, even when she could barely stand. By the time he finally relented and called the doctor, it was too late. She died in her bed, burning with fever, calling for help that never came. Harrison's expression was dark with anger. And you saw all this. I tried to help her, Louisa said, tears streaming down her face now. I begged my father to get the doctor. I tried to care for her myself, but nothing I did was enough, and when she died, my father did not even grieve. He just moved on like she had never existed. 3 months later, he was already talking about finding me a husband, about making advantageous connections. That is when I understood that I was just property to him, just another asset to be used. Harrison moved around the fire and sat beside her, pulling her into a careful embrace. I am so sorry, he said. You should never have had to go through that. Louisa leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. When Charles Whitmore proposed, when I saw that same cold calculation in his eyes that I had seen in my father's, I knew I could not do it. I would rather die free than live as someone's possession. You will never be anyone's possession, Harrison said fiercely. I promise you that. You are your own person, Louisa Kane, and no one will ever control you again. Hearing her new name spoken aloud made Louisa's heart skip. She was Louisa Kane now, married to this man who had shown her more kindness in 2 weeks than her father had in 19 years. It was strange and overwhelming and somehow right. They continued their journey north, through red rock canyons and pine forests, past trading posts and small settlements. Harrison pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the territory, about the people who lived here and the history written in the stones and the earth. Louisa found herself relaxing in ways she never had before. On the ranch, she had always been tense, always waiting for her father's next outburst or unreasonable demand. But with Harrison, she felt safe. He never raised his voice, never made demands, never treated her as anything less than an equal. And slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Harrison told her about growing up in New Mexico, about losing his father in a mining accident, about working his way up from ranch hand to foreman through years of hard work. Louisa told him about her mother's gentleness, about learning to read from old newspapers, about secret dreams of seeing the ocean someday. On the 8th night of their journey, they made camp in a grove of cottonwood trees near a creek. The air was cooler here, and the sound of running water was soothing. After dinner, Harrison pulled out a harmonica and played soft, melancholy tunes while Louisa cleaned their dishes in the creek. When she returned to the fire, she found Harrison watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "I was just thinking," Harrison said slowly, "about how lucky I am." "Lucky?" Louisa laughed. "You are married to a woman you barely know, traveling through dangerous country, and you have made enemies of some powerful men. That does not sound very lucky to me." "I stopped for a woman walking alone in the desert," Harrison said. "I could have ridden past like everyone else. But I stopped, and because I stopped, I met you. And now here we are, and I get to spend every day learning about you, talking with you, watching you discover your own strength. That is lucky, Louisa. That is the definition of lucky." Louisa felt warmth spreading through her chest. "You are a romantic," she said softly. "Maybe," Harrison admitted. "Or maybe I just know a good thing when I see it." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. Louisa leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, Harrison was looking at her with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked quietly. "A real kiss this time, not just for show." Louisa answered by closing the distance between them. Their lips met softly at first, tentative and exploring. But then Harrison's hand came up to cradle the back of her head, and Louisa's arms wound around his neck, and the kiss deepened into something that made her forget how to breathe. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Harrison rested his forehead against hers, his eyes still closed. "I have wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you," he admitted. "Even when I was half dead from heat and dehydration," Louisa teased. "Even then," Harrison said seriously. "You looked so determined, so fierce despite everything. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they settled down to sleep that night, it was side by side instead of on opposite sides of the fire. Harrison held her carefully, as if she were something precious, and Louisa felt safer than she had in years. They arrived at the ranch 2 days later, in the afternoon when the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. The ranch was enormous, stretching as far as Louisa could see in every direction. Cattle dotted the landscape, and in the distance, she could see a large ranch house and several outbuildings. "Welcome to the Hollister Ranch," Harrison said, gesturing at the expanse before them. "Home sweet home." They rode up to the main house, where a man in his 50s stood on the porch. He was tall and weathered, with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. This was Samuel Hollister, the ranch owner. "Kane," Samuel called out, walking down to meet them. "You are back sooner than I expected. And you brought company." "Mr. Hollister, I would like to introduce my wife, Louisa Kane," Harrison said, helping Louisa dismount. "Louisa, this is Samuel Hollister, the best rancher in Arizona." Samuel's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he recovered quickly and took off his hat. "Mrs. Kane, it is a pleasure, though I must say this is quite a surprise. When Harrison left 3 weeks ago, he was determinedly single." "Life is full of surprises, sir," Louisa said, shaking his hand. Samuel laughed. "That it is. Well, come inside, both of you. My wife will want to meet you immediately, Mrs. Kane. She has been after Harrison to settle down for years." The Hollister house was warm and welcoming, filled with comfortable furniture and the smell of cooking food. Samuel's wife, Margaret, was a round woman with a kind face and shrewd eyes. She took one look at Louisa and Harrison and smiled knowingly. "Well, well," she said. "Finally happened, did it? I told Samuel it would only take the right woman to catch our Harrison." Over dinner, Harrison explained the situation, carefully leaving out the more scandalous details, but making it clear that Louisa needed employment and a safe place to live. Samuel and Margaret listened carefully, their expressions growing serious as the story unfolded. "Your father sounds like a piece of work," Samuel said bluntly. "And Charles Whitmore is well known in these parts. Lost a cattle contract with him last year because I did not like the way he treated his ranch hands. If he is after you, Mrs. Kane, then you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. We take care of our own. And we could certainly use help with the books," Margaret added. "I have been managing them, but my eyes are not what they used to be. If you are good with numbers, Mrs. Kane, I would be grateful for the assistance." "I would be happy to help," Louisa said, feeling tears of gratitude prick at her eyes. "And please call me Louisa." "Only if you call us Samuel and Margaret," Margaret said warmly. Harrison and Louisa were given a small cabin on the property, about a quarter-mile from the main house. It was simple but clean, with a bedroom, a sitting area, and a small kitchen. Someone had already stocked it with basic supplies and left fresh linens on the bed. "This is ours?" Louisa asked, looking around in wonder. "All ours," Harrison confirmed. "Well, technically it belongs to the ranch, but as long as I work here, it is our home." Louisa walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, looking out the windows at the mountains in the distance. She had never had a place that was truly hers, never had the freedom to arrange things as she liked or simply be without someone watching over her shoulder. "It is perfect," she said. That night they lay together in the bed, neither quite ready to sleep. The window was open, letting in the cool night air and the sounds of the ranch. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked quietly. Louisa considered the question. 3 weeks ago she had been thrown out by her father with nothing. 2 weeks ago she had been scrubbing floors in a boarding house. Now she was married, living in a beautiful place with opportunities she had never imagined. "I think I am," she said slowly. "Or at least, I am beginning to understand what happiness might feel like." Harrison rolled onto his side to look at her. "I want you to be happy, Louisa. That is more important to me than anything else." "Why?" Louisa asked. "Why do you care so much? You could have left me in Douglas. You could have gone back to your life without looking back. Why did you bring me here? Why did you marry me?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Because when I saw you walking alone in that desert, something in my chest tightened. Because when I heard your story, I felt angry in a way I had not felt in years. Because every moment I spend with you makes me want more moments. Because I think I might be falling in love with you, and that terrifies and thrills me in equal measure." Louisa's breath caught. "You love me." "I am starting to," Harrison said honestly. "I know it is fast. I know we barely know each other. But I also know that I have never felt this way before, and I do not want to let it go." Louisa reached out and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I think I might be falling in love with you too," she whispered. "You saved me, Harrison. Not just from the desert or from my father, but from a life where I would have slowly died inside. You gave me choices. You gave me freedom. You gave me hope." Harrison kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise. And when they came together that night, it was not out of obligation or expectation, but out of genuine desire and growing love. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Louisa's life. She woke each morning beside Harrison, made breakfast in their little cabin, and then walked to the main house to work on the ranch accounts with Margaret. The work was challenging but satisfying, and Margaret was patient and encouraging. In the afternoons, Louisa would sometimes ride out with Harrison to check on the cattle or mend fences. He taught her about ranching, about reading the weather and understanding animal behavior. She learned to rope and brand, to recognize signs of disease or injury, to move cattle without spooking them. "You are a natural," Harrison said one day as they rode back to the cabin. "Samuel is already talking about hiring you on as a full hand." "I like the work," Louisa admitted. "I like being outside, being useful. I like feeling like I am contributing to something larger than myself." Harrison grinned. "We are going to make a proper rancher out of you yet." But their happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that her father and Charles Whitmore would not give up so easily. One evening in late September, Samuel called Harrison into his office for a serious conversation. "I got word today from Douglas," Samuel said grimly. "Charles Whitmore has been making inquiries about you and Louisa. He has also been spreading rumors that you kidnapped his intended bride." Harrison's face darkened. "That is a lie." "I know that, and anyone with sense knows that," Samuel said. "But Whitmore has money and influence. He has been talking to territorial officials trying to build a case. You need to be careful, Harrison." Men like Whitmore are dangerous when they feel they have been wronged. Harrison told Louisa about the conversation that night, and she felt cold fear settling in her stomach. "He will not stop," she said. "He is the kind of man who cannot stand to lose. He will keep coming until he gets what he wants or destroys us trying." "Then we fight," Harrison said firmly. "We have the truth on our side and we have friends. Samuel has connections throughout the territory. We will weather this storm." But the storm intensified over the following weeks. Charles Whitmore filed formal complaints with the territorial marshal, accusing Harrison of kidnapping and interference in a legal marriage contract. The fact that no such contract existed did not seem to matter. Whitmore had lawyers who specialized in twisting the truth. The marshal, a decent man named John Carter, rode out to the ranch to investigate the claims. He interviewed both Harrison and Louisa separately, asked detailed questions, and examined their marriage certificate. "Mr. Whitmore is claiming that you were coerced into this marriage," Marshal Carter said to Louisa, "that you were taken advantage of when you were vulnerable." "That is absolutely false," Louisa said clearly. "Harrison Kane saved my life. He offered me a choice and I made it freely. I married him because I wanted to, not because I was forced. Charles Whitmore, on the other hand, tried to force me into marriage against my will. My father tried to sell me to him like livestock. If anyone should be investigated, it is them." Marshal Carter nodded slowly. "That is what I figured. Whitmore strikes me as the kind of man who does not like to lose. But the law is the law, Mrs. Kane, and you have every right to choose your own husband. I will make that clear in my report." The marshal's report helped, but it did not end the harassment. Whitmore hired investigators to follow Harrison and Louisa, to dig into their pasts, to find any scrap of evidence that could be used against them. Malcolm Oliver threw his weight behind the campaign, using his influence to turn public opinion in Douglas against his daughter. Through it all, Harrison and Louisa clung to each other. Their love deepened through adversity, forged in the fire of external pressure. They learned each other's rhythms, learned to communicate without words, learned to find comfort in simple touches and shared silences. One cold November evening, as they sat by the fire in their cabin, Louisa realized she had missed her monthly courses. She had been so focused on the troubles with Whitmore that she had not noticed the signs, but now they were unmistakable. "Harrison," she said quietly, her hand resting on her stomach, "I think I might be with child." Harrison's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "You think?" "I am fairly certain," Louisa said. "I am about 6 weeks late and I have been feeling ill in the mornings." Harrison crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. "This is wonderful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you sure it is wonderful?" Louisa asked anxiously. "With everything going on with Whitmore, with all the uncertainty, it is wonderful," Harrison said firmly, pulling back to look at her. "Louisa, I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real life. And that includes children if we are blessed with them." "Yes, the timing is complicated, but when is the timing ever perfect?" Louisa felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "So much. Sometimes I cannot believe this is real, that I found you." "We found each other," Harrison corrected, kissing her softly. "And now we are starting a family." They told Samuel and Margaret the next day, and the older couple was overjoyed. Margaret immediately began knitting baby clothes, and Samuel talked about expanding the cabin to make room for a nursery. The whole ranch seemed to come alive with the news, everyone excited about the coming baby. But the joy was tempered by renewed aggression from Charles Whitmore. When word reached him that Louisa was pregnant, he flew into a rage and filed new complaints, claiming that Harrison had deliberately gotten Louisa pregnant to prevent her from returning to her father. The legal battles dragged on through the winter. Harrison had to make several trips to Tucson to meet with lawyers and give testimony. The strain was wearing on both of them, but they refused to be broken. In February, Marshal Carter returned to the ranch with news. "I have been investigating Charles Whitmore," he said without preamble. Quietly, so he would not know, and I found some interesting things. He laid out documents on Samuel's desk, medical reports, witness statements, financial records. "Whitmore's first wife died of a fall down the stairs," Carter said. "His second wife died of poisoning, officially ruled accidental. But I tracked down the doctors who treated them, and both expressed private doubts about the official causes of death. I also found servants who witnessed abuse, who saw bruises and heard screams. And I found financial records showing that Whitmore was deeply in debt, both times his wives died, and both times he inherited enough money to clear his debts." Harrison leaned forward. "You are saying he murdered them?" "I am saying there is enough evidence to warrant a formal investigation," Carter said. "And once I file my report, Whitmore is going to have much bigger problems than pursuing Mrs. Kane. He will be fighting to stay out of prison or avoid the gallows." The news spread quickly. Within days, Charles Whitmore was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. The trial became a sensation throughout the territory, with witnesses coming forward to testify about his cruelty and violence. Malcolm Oliver, who had been so eager to marry his daughter to Whitmore, suddenly found himself under intense scrutiny. His reputation was ruined, his business connections severed. In April, Charles Whitmore was convicted of murdering his second wife. The evidence was overwhelming. He was sentenced to hang. When Louisa heard the news, she felt a complex mixture of relief, vindication, and sadness. "I wish I could feel happy about it," she told Harrison, "but I just feel tired. So many women suffered because no one would stand up to him earlier." "You stood up to him," Harrison said. "You refused to be his next victim. And because you did, the truth finally came out. You saved yourself, Louisa, and probably saved other women too." In June 1884, Louisa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Henry Malcolm Kane, Henry for Harrison's father and Malcolm, because Louisa wanted to reclaim the name from her own father's legacy of cruelty. "Names are just sounds until we give them meaning," she said, as she held her son for the first time. "Let Malcolm mean something good now. Let it mean a child born from love instead of obligation." Harrison held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I am grateful every day." The first year of Henry's life was marked by profound changes. Malcolm Oliver, unable to bear the shame and ostracism, sold his ranch at a loss and left the territory. No one knew where he went, and Louisa discovered that she did not care. That chapter of her life was closed. Charles Whitmore was executed in August, and with his death, the last shadow hanging over Harrison and Louisa's happiness lifted. They were free to live their lives without looking over their shoulders. Louisa thrived in her new role as mother and ranch manager. She had a gift for numbers and organization, and within a year, she had streamlined the ranch's operations and increased profits by 15%. Samuel began talking about making Harrison and Louisa partners in the ranch. "You two have earned it," he said one evening over dinner. "This ranch is more successful now than it has ever been, and that is largely due to your combined efforts. Margaret and I are getting older, and we want to know the ranch will be in good hands when we are gone." Harrison looked at Louisa and she nodded. "We would be honored," Harrison said. 2 years later, in the spring of 1886, Louisa gave birth to twin girls. They named them Sarah and Eleanor, after Harrison's mother and Louisa's mother. The cabin had been expanded into a proper house by then, with 3 bedrooms and a spacious kitchen where Louisa loved to cook. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Harrison managed the cattle and the ranch hands, while Louisa handled the business side and raised their growing family. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Harrison took Louisa on a picnic to a spot overlooking the ranch. They could see the house where their children were being watched by Margaret, the barns and corrals, the cattle grazing peacefully, the mountains standing eternal in the distance. "Do you remember when I asked you what you wanted to be?" Harrison asked, pulling Louisa back against his chest as they sat on a blanket. "I remember," Louisa said. "I said I wanted to travel, to choose my own life." "Do you regret not getting to do those things?" Harrison asked quietly. "Do you ever feel trapped here?" Louisa turned to look at him, surprised. "Trapped? Harrison, I have never felt less trapped in my life. I did travel. I traveled from Douglas to here, from despair to happiness, from being someone's possession to being my own person. And I chose this life. Every day I choose it. I choose you, I choose our children, I choose this ranch and this work. That is what freedom is, Harrison, not the absence of commitment but the ability to choose your commitments." Harrison kissed her deeply. "I love you," he said. "I loved you when I first saw you in that desert, and I love you more now than I thought possible. You made me better. You made my life mean something." "We made each other better," Louisa corrected. "That is what love does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent. Louisa thought about the girl she had been 5 years ago, terrified and alone, walking into an uncertain future. She thought about the moment when Harrison Kane had stopped his horse and offered her water, had looked at her situation and said, "That is enough," as if her suffering mattered, as if she mattered. That moment had changed everything. It had set in motion a series of events that led her here, to this hillside, with this man, with 3 beautiful children sleeping in the house below. She had been disowned with nothing but the clothes she wore, and a cowboy had said that was enough, had stood up for her when no one else would. And from that simple act of decency, a whole life had grown. In 1888, Samuel and Margaret officially made Harrison and Louisa equal partners in the ranch. The Hollister Kane Ranch, as it was now called, became one of the most successful operations in northern Arizona. Louisa's business acumen combined with Harrison's skill with cattle created a winning combination. They had 2 more children over the following years. Another boy named Thomas in 1888 and a girl named Grace in 1890. Their house rang with laughter and the chaos of 5 children. It was loud and messy and absolutely perfect. Louisa taught all her children to read and write, passing on the love of learning her mother had instilled in her. Harrison taught them to ride and rope, to respect the land and the animals they cared for. Together, they taught their children about kindness, about standing up for what is right, about the importance of choosing love over hate. On summer evenings, the whole family would sit on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Harrison would play his harmonica while Louisa rocked the youngest child. The older children would chase fireflies in the yard, their laughter echoing across the ranch. "Tell us the story again," Sarah would beg. "Tell us about how you and Mama met." And Harrison would smile and pull Louisa close and begin the tale. He always started the same way. "Once upon a time, there was a brave woman walking alone in the desert." He would tell them about stopping to offer water, about bringing Louisa to the boarding house, about standing up to her father and Charles Whitmore. He would tell them about the journey north, about falling in love under the stars, about building a life together one day at a time. The children never tired of the story, perhaps because it was not a fairy tale with magic and fantasy, but a real story about real people who found each other in the midst of hardship. It was a story about courage and kindness, about how one moment of compassion could change everything. As the years passed, Harrison and Louisa became pillars of their community. They were known for their fairness, their generosity, and their willingness to help those in need. Louisa particularly made it her mission to help other women in difficult situations, offering employment or shelter, or simply a sympathetic ear. She never forgot what it felt like to be powerless, and she used her position to ensure other women would have choices she had almost been denied. In 1895, on a warm July afternoon much like the one 12 years earlier when Louisa's father had disowned her, she stood in the yard of the ranch watching her children play. Henry was 12 now, tall and serious like his father. Sarah and Alina were 8, inseparable as always. Thomas was 6, with his mother's dark hair and his father's smile. And Grace was 5, fearless and wild and utterly convinced she could do anything her older siblings could do. Harrison came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we have come," Louisa said softly, "about how different my life could have been if you had not stopped that day." "I will never regret stopping," Harrison said, "not for 1 second." Louisa turned in his arms to face him. His face was more weathered now, with lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun, but he was still the same man who had offered her water and asked for nothing in return. "I love you," she said. "I know I say it all the time, but I want you to know I mean it more deeply than words can express. You saved me, Harrison. You gave me a life worth living." "You saved me too," Harrison said, kissing her forehead. "I was just going through the motions before you. You gave me purpose, gave me a family, gave me a reason to be better. We saved each other, Louisa. That is how love works." They stood there in the yard, holding each other while their children played around them, while the ranch they had built together stretched out in all directions, while the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in its simplicity, but it contained everything that mattered. In 1900, as the new century dawned, the Hollister Kane Ranch celebrated its 15th anniversary of Harrison and Louisa's partnership with Samuel and Margaret. It was a huge celebration, with neighboring ranchers and townspeople from Flagstaff coming to join the festivities. There was food and music and dancing, stories told and memories shared. Henry, now 17 and preparing to head off to university, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. Who showed us that kindness is not weakness but the greatest strength. Who proved that no matter where you start, you can build something beautiful if you are willing to work for it and stand by each other." Everyone cheered and drank, and Louisa felt tears streaming down her face. She looked around at everything they had built, the thriving ranch, their healthy children, the friends and community who surrounded them. She thought about the terrified girl walking alone in the desert, certain she had lost everything. That girl could never have imagined this life, this happiness, this abundance of love. Samuel and Margaret Hollister passed away within months of each other in 1902, leaving the ranch entirely to Harrison and Louisa. It was bittersweet, losing the people who had been like parents to both of them, but it also felt like a completion of the circle. They renamed the property the Kane Ranch and continued to build on the legacy Samuel and Margaret had started. The children grew and found their own paths. Henry became a lawyer, using his education to help people who could not afford legal representation. Sarah married a teacher and opened a school for girls in Flagstaff. Eleanor became a doctor, one of the few female physicians in the territory. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, working alongside his father. And Grace, true to her wild spirit, became a journalist, traveling the country and writing about social issues. Through it all, Harrison and Louisa remained each other's constant. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their movements slowing, but their love never diminishing. They still sat on the porch every evening, still held hands like newlyweds, still found joy in simple moments together. In 1910, on their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. All 5 children came home with their families, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with noise and laughter. There were 16 grandchildren by then, ranging in age from newborn to 10 years old. 25 years, Harrison said during his toast at dinner. 25 years ago, I saw a woman walking alone in the desert, and I made a choice. I chose to stop, to offer help, to get involved in someone else's troubles. It was the best choice I ever made. Louisa, you are the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in everything that matters. You made me a better man. You made my life meaningful, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Louisa stood and kissed him in front of everyone, not caring that their children groaned and the grandchildren giggled. And I would walk across that desert 1,000 times if I knew you were waiting at the end, she said. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. You gave me everything, Harrison Kane. Everything that matters. As the celebration continued around them, as their children and grandchildren laughed and talked and lived, Harrison and Louisa slipped outside to the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead, just as they had been that first night when they had kissed by the campfire. You ever wonder what happened to them? Louisa asked. To my father, to the people in Douglas, sometimes, Harrison admitted. But mostly I do not care. That part of our lives is over. What matters is what we built from the ashes. We built something good, Louisa said, leaning against him. We built something great, Harrison corrected. Look at our children, our grandchildren. Look at this ranch, this life. We took nothing and turned it into everything. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the laughter from inside, feeling the warm summer breeze, existing in perfect contentment. They had fought hard for this life, had overcome obstacles and enemies and their own fears. But they had done it together, and that made all the difference. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. Harrison and Louisa weathered them all side by side. They lost friends, celebrated marriages, welcomed new grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and the Kane name became synonymous with integrity and fairness throughout Arizona. In 1920, Louisa published a memoir about her experiences, titled From Desert to Home. It became a surprising bestseller, inspiring women across the country who were fighting for their own independence and autonomy. She donated all the proceeds to organizations that helped women leave abusive situations. Harrison was so proud he could barely contain himself. My wife, the famous author, he would say, showing the book to anyone who would look. I am only famous because of you, Louisa would counter. You are the hero of the story. No, Harrison would say seriously. You are the hero. I just had the good sense to recognize it. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, surrounded by 4 generations of family. Harrison was 72 now, his hair completely white, his movements slow but still steady. Louisa was 64, her face lined with laugh lines and sun exposure, her hair silver but her eyes still bright and sharp. "40 years," Harrison said during dinner, his voice not as strong as it once was but still carrying conviction. 40 years of waking up next to the woman I love. 40 years of building something meaningful. 40 years of being grateful every single day that I chose to stop that afternoon in the desert. Louisa Kane, you are my greatest adventure, my finest achievement, my truest love. Here is to 40 more years. Everyone laughed because everyone knew that 40 more years was unlikely at their age, but they raised their glasses anyway and drank to the impossible hope of it. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Harrison and Louisa sat on their porch one more time. It had become a ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day, a time to reflect and simply be. "You have any regrets?" Harrison asked suddenly. Louisa considered the question seriously. "I regret the pain my mother suffered. I regret that she did not live to see me happy. I regret the years I wasted being afraid of my father. But do I regret the path that led me here to you, to this life? Not for 1 second. Even the hard parts," Harrison pressed. "Especially the hard parts," Louisa said, "because those are what made us strong. Those are what taught us the value of what we have. If everything had been easy, we might not appreciate it the way we do." Harrison pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat that way for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of the ranch they had built together. "Thank you," Harrison said quietly. "For what? For trusting me that day. For taking a chance on a stranger. For building this life with me. For every single day of the past 40 years. Thank you for stopping," Louisa whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for saying that is enough and meaning it. Thank you for loving me the way you have." They sat there under the stars. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love that spanned decades and produced generations, who had proven that kindness and courage could create miracles. The story of how they met became family legend, passed down through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was told at weddings and family reunions, a reminder of where they all came from, of the moment when one act of compassion changed everything. And whenever anyone asked the secret to their lasting love, Harrison and Louisa would look at each other and smile. "We chose each other," Louisa would say. "Every single day," Harrison would add. "Even on the hard days," Louisa would continue. "Especially on the hard days," Harrison would finish. Because that was the truth at the heart of their story. It was not about a dramatic rescue or a passionate romance, though those elements were there. It was about choosing love, choosing kindness, choosing each other again and again, day after day, year after year, until choosing each other became as natural as breathing. Harrison Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1928, at the age of 75. He died in the bed he had shared with Louisa for 43 years, holding her hand, surrounded by the family they had created together. His last words were "Thank you for stopping," directed at Louisa, an echo of her own words from decades earlier. Louisa grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had been loved well and completely for more than 4 decades, and that love sustained her even in loss. She lived another 7 years, spending her time with her ever-growing family, tending her garden and writing letters to her many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She passed away in 1935 at the age of 74, on a warm July afternoon much like the one when she had first met Harrison. Her children found her in her rocking chair on the porch, a peaceful smile on her face, looking out toward the mountains. On her lap was a worn journal, open to an entry from July 1883. "Today, a cowboy stopped to offer me water when I had nothing left. He asked for nothing in return. He simply said that is enough and changed my life forever. I do not know what the future holds, but for the first time in a very long time, I have hope. The Kane Ranch continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the foundation Harrison and Louisa had built. Their descendants spread across the country, carrying with them the lessons of kindness, courage, and choosing love every single day. And in Flagstaff, Arizona, there stands a small memorial with two names engraved side by side: Harrison Kane and Louisa Oliver Kane. Below their names is a simple inscription: "He stopped when others passed by. She chose courage when others chose fear. Together they built a legacy of love." The story of how a disowned woman and a compassionate cowboy found each other in the Arizona desert became more than just family legend. It became a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say, "That is enough," and mean it. One person willing to stop, to help, to care when it would be easier to ride on by. And from that one moment of basic human decency, an entire lifetime of love and happiness and meaning had grown, spreading out like ripples in a pond, touching generation after generation, proving that love, real love, the kind that chooses kindness and compassion every single day, that love endures forever.